This is Burned Secrets and Betrayal, Chapter 1.
It starts with a fire. The kind that doesn't just take a building, it takes history with it. Chris hasn't been back to the workshop since the night it burned, since the funeral, since James. But grief has its own pull, and when he steps into the ashes, what he finds isn't just smoke and memory.
It's a camcorder, a man he swore he'd never touch again, and a secret that links them both to something deeper, darker, and still burning. This is where the match was struck. You ever walk back into a place you swore you'd burn down in your mind? Like your body moved before your logic could catch up? That's what this was. A walk into wreckage. A return to the scene of a memory you never really survived. Chris didn't come back for closure. Not really. He came back because something in him still itched with the heat of that night. The fire, the silence, the man, James. And whatever had been buried beneath the smoke, the sex, and the lies, tonight, it was clawing its way to the surface. The shop still smelled like secrets, even burned down. Smoke-stained beams curled like old fingers toward a ceiling that no longer existed, and Chris stepped over the threshold like it was a crime scene, which, in a way, it still was. The ground crunched with ash and memory. His boots scuffed against the spot where the workbench used to be. The one his uncle said was built from the bones of the original church that stood here before the riots, before the neighborhood got bought up, flipped, and forgotten, before the fire, the real one, the one that took him. He hadn't planned to come back, had told himself again and again that whatever answers he wanted were gone with the smoke. But grief has its own calendar, and tonight it circled back, pulling him toward the wreckage like it still owed him something. He moved with caution, but not fear. Chris had already lost everything worth fearing. What he didn't expect was the sound, faint, metallic, like someone had beat him here. And then James stepped out from the back shadows wearing that same dark t-shirt soaked through with sweat and sin. Hard-bodied like nothing ever touched him, soft-spoken like everything did. Eyes low, but not sorry. Chris didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat tightened, not from the smoke, but from the months of silence between them. Silence thick with what they didn't say after the funeral, after the will, after that one night in the rain where Chris told him never again, and James just nodded, like he already knew it was a lie. They didn't touch, but the air between them pulsed, charged with unfinished sentences and the ghost of every moment they never claimed. Chris looked away first, scanning the debris until something red caught his eye beneath a sheet of warped tin. A camcorder, one of the old ones. Big, heavy, and still holding on to whatever was last fed into it. He wiped the lens with his sleeve, clicked it on. The playback light blinked green. The screen flickered. And there they were. James and Mark. Not just close, not just familiar. Intimate in a way that made Chris's spine straighten and his stomach fold. Mark, suit half open, tie gone, fingers tracing James's neck like a threat and a promise. James, shirtless, still, eyes locked on something just off screen. Something Chris couldn't quite see until the angle shifted. And in the dusty reflection of a framed photo on the wall, the truth hit like a slap. He was there, holding the camera, watching it all. The air cracked. James's mouth parted, but the words didn't land.
Chris's hands trembled around the camcorder. Because it wasn't just about the sex. It was about the game. The three of them. The deals. The quiet nights. The cash that came in wrapped in legal envelopes and left in duffel bags. The shop was never just a shop. It was a front. A gift. A trap. And Chris had been playing house with devils dressed like family.
Then the back door creaked.
Mark, bleeding from somewhere near the ribs, shirt dark with it. Armed, but calm. Always calm. He looked at them like a man who'd already done the math. Like someone who'd been shot before and walked away. Rumors said he worked for a man named Langston Shaw. A name Chris had only heard in whispers. Cold. Military. Collects debts like broken promises.
Mark didn't flinch. He looked at the camcorder and smiled.
He told them everything. About Chris's uncle. The fires, the payoffs, the hidden accounts. About the backdoor deals with city councilmen who liked their charity with a side of pleasure. About how they were all complicit. About how the night the shop burned, it wasn't an accident. It was a warning. And someone didn't heed it. If it were up to Mark, he said, they'd still be bedroom buddies. But it wasn't. And someone had to go. The words hovered like smoke. Chris stepped back. James reached for the crowbar near his foot. Mark raised his weapon slow, deliberate, like he wanted them to see it coming. Chris didn't think. He just moved. Eyes darting for something, anything, sharp enough to matter.
But before the shot rang out, smoke surged through the broken windows, thick and blinding, hot with fresh ignition. A crash, a curse, and then Maria's voice, sharp, soldier-trained, cut through the heat. Move. Now, hands pulled, glass shattered, and they were outside, stumbling into the back seat of a beat-up Charger, lungs burning, clothes scorched, tape clutched tight in Chris's grip. Nobody spoke, not even Maria, who slammed the gas like she had orders from God. James pressed his head back against the seat, jaw tight, knuckles bleeding. Chris held the camcorder like a confession. The footage still played in his mind. Not just the bodies, not just the betrayal, but the look in his own eyes in that reflection. The hunger, the knowing. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The tape was just one piece. And if the shop was just a front, then there were more. Other places, other fires, other cameras still rolling. He thought of something his uncle once told him. Drunk on rum, whispering in the dark after a fundraiser gone too long. Power don't get passed down, baby. It gets planted. And sometimes it needs fire to grow. In the silence of the car, the truth sat heavy between them, slick with sweat, smoke, and memory. And Chris knew the real story hadn't even started yet.
That was chapter 1 of Burned Secrets and Betrayal. Chris walked into the wreckage looking for answers, but what he found was heat and a camcorder, a man he couldn't let go, and a reflection that said he was already part of the game. Now, the tape's still warm. The lies are cracking. And someone powerful just told the truth like it was foreplay. But this story doesn't stop in the workshop.
Because in chapter 2, we follow the smoke to the motel, to the silence, to the people who lit the first match and the ones who've been watching ever since. This time, Chris isn't just reacting. He's learning the rules and starting to bend them.
He woke up sore, Not the kind of sore you shake off with a hot shower or stretch out with your arms overhead. This was the kind that lives deep in the muscle, in the jaw, in the breath. It hums behind the eyes and settles in the places you try to forget. Chris opened his eyes to the beige ceiling of a motel room that reeked of sweat, regret, and cheap cigarettes. The sheets were twisted around his legs. His shirt was still halfway on, and the camcorder rested on his chest like it had something else to say. James was gone. No note, no sound. Just the echo of skin on skin and the ache in Chris's lower back from where the wall caught him the night before. The scent of James still lingered on his collarbone, that soft musk he used to love and now couldn't trust. His mouth still tasted like blood, his neck like heat, and the silence in the room was louder than anything either of them could have said. On the dresser, an envelope, $5,000, a burner phone. Maria's handwriting, sharp and slanted. You've got 24 hours to disappear. Use it smart. Chris didn't touch it, didn't move, just reached for the camcorder and hit play. He scrubbed past the parts he'd already watched, the sweat, the eye contact, Mark's slow grin, James's too long hesitation. Past the moment in the dusty reflection when he realized he was the one holding the camera. But just before the tape cut to static, there was something else. A shadow in the doorframe, broad shoulders, bald head, arms folded like a verdict, watching, smiling. And Chris didn't need a name to know what kind of man that was. Langston Shaw. The name had circled the shop like a rumor before the fire. Military contractor turned silent investor. The kind of man who never appeared in photos but always showed up in the payouts. The kind of man who knew when to whisper and when to bleed. And now, Chris knew. Whatever was happening, Langston was part of it. He sat up, lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He wasn't a smoker, but he needed something sharp in his lungs. Something to match the way the truth had started to sting under his skin. He opened the drawer beneath the motel Bible and pulled out the file his uncle had left him. Across the front, F3/silhouette. Inside, a contract. His name. James's, Mark's. And one more, Cameron Vale. Chris's hands tightened. He hadn't seen Cameron since the gala, back when the shop still looked like hope, back when people were smiling in the front and signing deals in the back. Cameron had always been too smooth. Turtlenecks in the summer, that expensive cologne that lingered for hours after he left the room. He didn't build anything himself. He paid others to burn and blamed the ashes on the community. And according to the contract, he was the one who upgraded the insurance on the shop 6 weeks before it went up in flames. Chris didn't realize he was grinding his teeth until the knock came. Not loud, not desperate, just calm. Ruben stepped in like he already knew what the place looked like. Mid-30s, baggy tee that read, "Archives are sexy." High tops, laptop bag slung across his chest. He looked like someone who'd been pushed out of a job at City Hall for knowing too much and refusing to smile about it. He didn't ask permission to enter, just locked the door behind him and set his bag on the bed. His voice was quiet, almost bored, like this was just another day. There had been other fires, smaller ones, quieter, all insured, all sold off within weeks, all tied to the same shell company. And on the board of that company, buried deep under aliases and fake names, was Cameron Vale. Ruben showed Chris the receipts, contracts, disbursement logs, real estate transfers dressed up as community reinvestment.
And in the middle of all that data, Chris's name, not just as a beneficiary, as a board advisor, 50 grand already earmarked under his name. Frozen only because his uncle locked it down before he died. Chris hadn't signed anything, but the file had his name, his birthday, his social security number. Someone had done it for him. He sat with that, jaw tight, cigarette burning low. He hated how James still lingered on his skin, hated how betrayal didn't feel shocking anymore. It felt familiar, almost warm. He remembered the way James looked at him in the reflection of that photo on the tape. Like he knew Chris was watching. Like he wanted him to. He didn't ask Ruben how he found him, didn't ask why he came. Just took the flash drive and stared at the data until it made his eyes hurt. Across town, James was laying low at Maria's safe house. Shirt off, face blank. One hand resting over his stomach as the ceiling fan above spun lazy circles across his chest. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Chris's face. Not from the shop, not from the motel, but from before. That first night they kissed, when the shop still felt like a sanctuary and not a crime scene. In the corner sat a duffel bag. Inside, a second camcorder. The one he never showed Chris. The one he never watched, because he didn't need to. He already knew what it held. Footage from a fundraiser Cameron hosted. James's signature on a contract. Mark's hand on his shoulder. His uncle's voice saying this will protect him. It wasn't about the money. James had said yes because he believed in something. Believed that if they just played the game right, they could build something real, safe, something that Chris could inherit without ever knowing what it cost. But somewhere along the way, the game shifted. The rules changed. And by the time James realized how dirty it all was, the fire had already started. They didn't plan to meet again, but they did. Rooftop of the old printing building. City buzzing below them like it didn't care who lived or died. Chris showed up first, shirt half unbuttoned, sweat still clinging to the back of his neck. The camcorder in one hand, the folder in the other. James leaned against the railing, arms folded like he was holding something in. Maybe guilt, maybe need. When they stepped into each other's space, it didn't take much. Just heat, just memory. Just two men who didn't know how to let go. They kissed like punishment, like confession. Chris bit James's bottom lip until it bled. James shoved Chris against the wall like he was trying to forget. They fucked fast, then slow, then fast again. Not out of love, out of habit, out of pain. Out of the need to feel something that didn't come with conditions. Afterwards, they sat on the concrete, breathing hard, clothes half on. No words, just silence. And in that silence, the truth came. James hadn't started the last fire, but he'd started the first. Not to kill anyone, but to destroy a contract. The one that tied Chris to the game before he even knew the rules. The one that would have made him complicit before he even had a choice. Chris didn't say anything. Just watched the ember of his cigarette fade into the wind. When he got back to the motel, everything was gone. Ruben's laptop, the flash drive, the camcorder, the folder. All that remained was a lighter, still warm, and a USB drive. No label. The burner phone rang before he could load it. Maria's voice was clipped and urgent. Something in it cracked.
They found Reuben. He was gone.
And just like that, the third fire started. That was chapter 2 of Burned Secrets and Betrayal. Now the game's in motion. The money's traced. The bodies are gone. Chris knows what he's part of and what he was never supposed to survive. But this isn't about survival anymore. This is about control. In chapter 3, the heat moves into the room where decisions get made. Cameron, Langston, Maria, James, and Chris walking in like he owns it. Because sometimes, the only way out of the fire is to become the one who lights it. He wore black. Not for mourning, that part was done. This wasn't grief anymore. This was strategy. Silk shirt open just enough to make them look twice. Slacks pressed. Chain low on his collarbone. No tie. No apologies. Chris walked into the club like he'd been there before. Like he'd already survived it once and came back with fire in his lungs. The room was thick with velvet, secrets, and money. Bourbon slick whispers. Soft jazz bleeding from speakers too discreet to see. People leaned in close at low tables, watched each other over the rims of crystal glasses. But Chris didn't stop, didn't slow. His eyes were locked on the red-lit room in the back, glass-walled, half-hidden. That's where the power was. Always had been.
Cameron Vale sat inside, legs crossed like a man who knew every exit, grinning like he always did, like he wasn't scared of anything that could bleed. Across from him, Langston Shaw, bigger in person, dark suit, darker stare, hands too still. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make the air shift.
Maria stood behind the bar, hair pulled back, face calm, clothes clean, watching, every muscle ready. No gun in sight, but that didn't matter. Maria was the weapon. And near the exit, James, gloved, quiet, dressed in black like he never left mourning behind. They hadn't spoken since the rooftop, since the fuck that tasted like penance, since the cigarette between them burned to nothing and neither one reached for the other. But now, seeing him again, the breath still caught in Chris's throat. Even now. He didn't look at James, not directly, just nodded once and walked into the red-lit room like it was his name on the lease. Cameron stood up slowly. Finally, his smile said, "You ready to join us?" Chris didn't blink, didn't speak, just stepped forward until they were nearly chest to chest. Langston looked up. "You think this ends with a stare down and a threat?" Chris tilted his head. He wasn't afraid of Langston anymore, because he knew something now. He knew that fear was a trick they played to keep you out of the room, and he was already in. Maria gave the nod. Subtle. Barely a movement. But Chris caught it. The room was live. Every mic hot. Every word a bullet. Cameron leaned in, voice dipped in honey and rot. He told Chris he could have had it all. This table, this access, this seat on the board. Said it like a compliment, like a seduction. But Chris heard the threat under it. Heard the leash they'd wrapped around his name years ago. Heard his uncle's voice again. That low rasp from a voicemail Chris never deleted. If they offer you a seat, it's because they already bought your silence. Chris took another step. The heat in his body wasn't fear. It was clarity. He told Cameron, without saying it, that he knew the fires weren't accidents, that the shop wasn't a casualty. It was proof. Cameron smirked, whispered something about protection, about legacy, about how Chris's uncle died with his name clean because the rest of them got dirty on his behalf. And then Langston reached into his jacket. Everything cracked at once. Langston moved fast. One shot, then two. Langston stumbled. Blood hit the wall like paint. And just like that, the man who never blinked was on the floor, eyes wide, body twitching once before going still. Cameron didn't move. Just stared at Chris like he finally saw him clearly. Not the boy. Not the pawn. The fire starter. And Chris? He didn't smile. Didn't flinch. Just stepped in close enough to whisper something no one else could hear. Not a threat. A promise. Then turned and walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Outside, the alley was humid. Quiet. James was waiting. Face unreadable. When Chris passed him, their hands brushed, just barely. Enough to say, we lived through it. Enough to say, this isn't finished. Maria followed seconds later. Blood on her sleeve. Calm in her breath. She said it was done. Chris didn't answer. Just lit a cigarette and watched the end curl orange. The next morning, he stood alone in the burned-out shell of the workshop. Dust settled on the same beam his uncle carved initials into. CR, etched with a pocket knife, right next to a crooked heart. No prayers. No guilt. Just the sound of everything that survived the fire. Behind him, a voice, polite, controlled. Mr. Reed, the board is ready for you. He didn't turn around, just walked forward. Dark suit, no tie. New fire in his chest. And as the door closed behind him, the words rose in his throat like smoke. I didn't survive the fire. I learned how to start one. Thank you for listening to Stories Between Us Anthology. You can find every episode on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Rate the show and leave a comment. It helps more people find us.